Now I'd like to call upon Jeffrey Orman and Robert Mitchell from the Professionals with Disabilities Committee to give us a little talk. So come on down. And just so people can manage themselves, we have a break after this presentation, and then we'll be moving on to United Sisters.
There you go.
Thanks, Chris. It's great to be up here. It's tough to follow an act like CJ is there. But I'm Jeffrey Orman. I'm the chair of the Professionals with Disability Committee, and this is my colleague, Robert Mitchell. We both have invisible disabilities. And one of the things I was going to say is, a go? So when we talk to people about our invisible disability, it's important that we listen and we understand each other. Just like I want to listen and understand all the stories of the different people that we've seen today. It's all about being a human being. We're all human beings in this room, and yet we all have so many differences. And that's what I love about empowerment. I was here 2 years ago, and we had about a quarter the number of people. I'm so excited to see so many people this year come to empowerment. So give yourselves a hand of applause. So we're talking today about invisible disabilities. They are physical, mental, or neurological conditions that can disadvantage some, but are not immediately apparent to others. This makes them more challenging in their need for understanding and inclusivity in the workplace. These conditions may limit a person's activities, create challenges for them in their everyday life, or require accommodations, even though the disability isn't visible to the outside world. They can vary in severity and may fluctuate over time. As you're probably aware, some of them are chronic and some of them are episodic. These fall into a number of classes: chronic pain conditions such as fibromyalgia, arthritis, mental health disorders such as bipolar disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, neurological conditions such as epilepsy, multiple sclerosis, and migraines, autoimmune diseases such as lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's disease, learning disabilities such as dyslexia, ADHD, auditory processing disorders, and sensory processing disorders such as heightened sensory sensitivities.
Thanks, Jeff. So we're going to look at a case study just to level set and make sure that we understand what this is about. This is a generalized, depersonalized case study. It deals with a 32-year-old project manager who's diagnosed with fibromyalgia. Fibromyalgia is a chronic pain disorder, and it gives people fatigue and cognitive disabilities. They're not immediately visible, so you can't see that somebody has fibromyalgia. And it makes it challenging because it fluctuates, it changes. So one day the person could be having a good day, and then the next day they could be unproductive and unfocused. So the symptoms, as I said, fluctuate. So the ability to meet deadlines and focus at work impact the person. They want to do a good job. They're trying to do their best. They're committed to their work. They're professionals. But they just can't seem to keep up because of this condition they're dealing with. Their colleagues see them sometimes as being difficult to deal with because they don't understand the condition. And they're isolated because they're not really feeling supported or communicating about what's happening with them. Usually what happens under these circumstances, and this is why these conditions in a union environment are more favorable for people, is hopefully you as a union representative have earned the trust of these individuals, and that they know they can come to you and trust your confidentiality in keeping their condition between the two of you, and that you can have an open conversation about how you assist them in being accommodated in the workplace. So once the union member who has this background and understanding, and this is really just a primer today for you, it's not going to give you the full background you need, but it does give you the ability to be compassionate, because that is the key element of how you manage a person through and assist them and support them when they have an invisible disability, because it's very difficult to talk about these in a workplace. So the union rep will work collaboratively with the person, and then eventually, when the person's ready and the union rep's prepared, they will meet with management. And hopefully, if it's a healthy labor relations relationship, you'll schedule a meeting with the employer and start to talk about the condition and talk about medical accommodations. And what you really need to have a conversation with the employer about is how to understand it, communicate it in the workplace, and make sure that person feels supported. And every case is different for these individuals. I'm dealing with one at work right now where somebody has several unseen disabilities, and getting them accommodated is extremely difficult. But the focus has to be on the person and how you accommodate them. Modify their workload. Acknowledge like in this case, acknowledge the fluctuating nature of the condition, and give them the tools that they need, whether they're computer aids, software, furniture, that they can participate effectively in the workplace. It also requires that the employer might need to take on some education generally in the workplace about invisible disability so that coworkers can understand, without disclosing conditions, but understand that their colleagues may be struggling with something. They don't need to ask what it is, but they do need to be able to be sensitive to another person's experience in the workplace. And also that people are able to reach out and provide support on an ongoing basis and be accommodating of one another. There is a campaign about unseen disabilities that involves a sunflower on a lanyard that sort of tells people in the workplace that you do have an unseen disability and that you may need some accommodation. Next. Thanks.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the statistics that we have with regards to invisible disabilities. First of all, one of the things that I thought about when CJ was up here is, for myself, gratitude is a very big part of coping and recognizing our own abilities to be resilient in this kind of situations that we can come across. So it's important that we empower ourselves to a great deal, but it's also important that you as people surrounding us be our allies, not bystanders. Disabilities impact an individual's quality of life and their ability to work or participate in social activities. It's recognizing and accommodating these disabilities that's key to creating an inclusive and supportive environment. Approximately 16% of U.S. workers have an invisible disability. In the white-collar and college-educated settings, around 30% of employees report having a disability, with about 62% of these being invisible. That makes about 1 in 5 workers. It's not really surprising that we find a lot of people with the white-collar increasing number of disabilities, because you think about, again, fortunately, with the environment that we work in, often people with disabilities are frowned on a great deal in a lower educated environment. So we can be very grateful for what we have. Despite this prevalence, only a minute fraction, about 3.2% of people, feel comfortable disclosing their disability status to employers. I find that incredibly shocking. 3.2% of the people would actually out about their disability. The hesitancy often stems from concerns over discrimination, the perceived stigma or fear that colleagues may judge their capabilities differently. There's also reluctance underscoring the need for greater organizational awareness and supportive practices to help normalize individual disabilities and provide the necessary accommodations, fostering a more inclusive work environment. These statistics reveal to us both the presence of invisible disabilities and the importance of union and organizational support to help employees feel safe disclosing and managing their needs within the workplace. In Ontario, data is gathered through the Canadian Survey on Disabilities and the Labour Force Survey. Specific statistics for invisible disabilities alone in professional fields is extremely limited, but broader data can help provide context. In terms of the prevalence of disabilities in professional occupations in Canada, approximately 22% of working age adults report having a disability. However, only about 7.9% individuals with disabilities work in a professional, scientific, and technical service, a slightly lower representation than those without disabilities. In terms of employment, Ontario mirrors these national trends, with many persons with disabilities employed in healthcare, social assistance, and public administration roles. Data also shows that individuals with individual disabilities are more likely to work part-time compared to those without disabilities, indicating a potential impact on earnings and their career progression. This highlights the importance of union advocacy for an improved accessibility, workplace accommodations, and inclusive hiring practices to support these members. Fortunately, there's legislation. We're very fortunate in Canada to have the amount of legislation that we have that speak to disabilities, and we should keep these in mind when the disability is invisible. As members and as representatives of your workplace, it's important that you become familiar with some of the rights that we have as workers. The Ontario Human Rights Code, besides prohibiting employment discrimination on grounds such as disability, it grants the right to privacy. Employees have the right to privacy regarding their disability. Employees are not required to disclose specific details about their condition, only enough information to arrange the necessary accommodations. Another one that I'd like to highlight is the Employment Standards Act, which mandates that an organization develop policies to ensure an accessible work environment for all employees, particularly leave provisions. It provides employees with the rights to various leaves, such as personal emergency leave, family caregiver leave, and medical leave. The other one is flexibility in their work arrangements. This encourages people with invisible disabilities to benefit from the flexible work arrangements for conditions such as chronic pain or episodic disabilities that might require intermittent breaks or flexible work hours.
So now we'll just talk about some rights and obligations. So an employee has a right, 3 rights primarily: the right to non-discrimination, the right to accommodation, and the right to privacy. Under the right to non-discrimination, obviously we're very familiar with this: no discrimination or harassment in the workplace. And there can't be any decisions made on the disability. So employers can't say, well, we can't give them that promotion because of this disability, even if it's an invisible disability. Accommodation is up to the point of undue hardship. Many of us right now are probably dealing with this issue. I'll just speak to this briefly, where we're dealing with medical accommodations, and we have these frequency of attendance at work provisions for hybrid work arrangements, and the employers are being very aggressive with regards to those when medical accommodations are sought, unreasonably so. I think the argument we can easily make is that we went through a 3 to 4 year period where everybody worked remotely, and if a person requires remote work as an accommodation, every employer should be capable of that if it's required on a medical basis. So that's there is no undue hardship in many of these cases. With regards to the right to privacy, confidentiality in these processes is absolutely imperative. Letting somebody's disability out into the workplace is the worst type of failure for the individual and for the future trust of people that you will have working with you. Employers have the obligation to accommodate people with disabilities, and it takes a collaborative approach. So as a union representative, as an employee who has the disability and the employer, you're supposed to work collaboratively, not adversarially in these circumstances. And it has to be an accessible workplace. AODA has requirements that are kicking in as of January 2025, and I think that we should probably sit down as a union and review those to be sure that our workplaces are compliant with those requirements. But it has to be an accessible workplace, and not just physically, but cognitively, psychologically safe. So that's the process with which they should establish accommodations. As I said, the employer has a responsibility for psychological health and safety in the workplace, and it has to be free from bullying. If there's no disclosure of the disability, there should be no bullying. but also there should be no bullying based on the symptoms or the outcomes of the unseen disability. And policies clearly have to be implemented for this purpose. Jeff mentioned the flexibility of leaves provisions that are in the Employment Standards Act, and it is required that leaves are given to people who have medical issues. The key challenges faced by people with disabilities seem fairly obvious. There's a lot of stigma and misunderstanding. People think that if you have I've heard many people criticize fibromyalgia, which we've talked about earlier, and there's just no understanding of these things, and they see their coworkers and colleagues not performing the same way they did yesterday or last week, and they start to get hypercritical about that, and sometimes we as union members will hear that criticism. We have to control that criticism because we may need to go speak to that person and see if there's something they need to disclose to us, which requires us to maintain trust and confidentiality for those individuals. There's always accommodation challenges under these circumstances because every case is different, and sometimes there's multiple issues that a person's dealing with that you have to be sensitive to, and it's not a one-size-fits-all solution for people. The final thing that we have to talk about is performance evaluations. All of us have some kind of performance evaluation in our job, in our collective agreements, whether it's step progression or not, it's all there. And people with disabilities need to be accommodated in that as well, and they need to be not understood to be having a poor work ethic or a poor performance necessarily, but it's just the symptom of the condition that they're dealing with. So, yeah.
Just to demonstrate this, it takes people with invisible disabilities, some of them, a lot longer to do the exact same task. I know for myself, I spend many hours probably doing the wrong thing as a union member, giving free work hours just to make sure that my work is at the same level as other people's. So it's something that we do to ourselves just to protect ourselves. Let's take a look at some of the ways we can foster an inclusive workplace. We can raise awareness and reduce stigma through education and training. The training programs can address misconceptions about invisible disabilities and reduce stigma. One of the things that we shared as a group about the Black and racialized employees was the idea of just having a lunchtime talk about the journeys that each of us have been in. And it doesn't have to be any particular topic. It can just talk about each of our stories and the journeys that we've come through. We have a diversity as employees, as human beings, and it's very valuable to share those experiences because we might be drawing upon something else that somebody has gone through. They can include topics like mental health literacy, recognizing the impact of chronic conditions, and supporting cognitive differences. There needs to be a methodology in terms of the visible leadership commitment. Leaders play a vital role in setting the tone for inclusivity. I'm fortunate at my employer that some of the people in leadership have taken a stand on discrimination with regards to disability and are extremely supportive of disabilities in the workplace. It's important that these leaders openly support disability awareness, talk about mental health, and advocate for inclusive practices to make it clear that these values are integral to the company culture. A third thing is building support networks. Peer mentorship programs, such as with the youth and with other people in the workplace that can help them find the supportive network that they need. Mentors who understand the challenges of navigating the workplace with an invisible disability can provide both practical advice and emotional support. And buddy systems can reach out to those challenging periods and reduce isolation that can sometimes, with the isolation that can occur, it can improve their well-being when they have a buddy. Support matters. The support of unions is crucial for professionals with invisible disabilities, as it provides both a structured platform for advocacy, protection, and empowerment. Unions play a pivotal role in ensuring that employees with invisible disabilities receive the accommodations and support that they need to thrive in the workplace. Advocating for equitable treatment and inclusive policies, unions can help to reduce the stigma and create a culture of understanding and acceptance. Unions empower members by educating them about their rights under legislation such as the Ontario Human Rights Code and the AODA, enabling individuals to navigate their work environments more effectively. Research has indicated that workplaces that prioritize inclusivity and provide adequate support for employees with disabilities see improvements in the employee satisfaction. Just in conclusion, I would highlight that unions are a vital part in advocating for the rights and needs of professionals with invisible disabilities. They help us to foster a more inclusive and supportive work environment that benefits both employees and the organization as a whole. I would invite any of you that knows people with disabilities to think about their role, that they could become involved with this Professionals with Disability Committee. We do need members, and we would be glad to have you. What we're going to do now is we're going to take some questions from the audience, and you can just basically come up to the mics, and we will do our best to answer your questions that have to do with invisible disabilities. So a great topic, lots of questions that people might have.
Also, if people have stories about supporting somebody with an invisible disability that would be helpful for us to hear, it'd be great as well.
Yeah, so I work for Ontario Power Generation, and we're going to free address, which is fine, except for the fact that a lot of the areas do not have walls or partitions between you and other workers. In fact, in the headquarters, there's actually work areas right next to a big meeting area with no sound barriers. And my concern, and it was for all staff's mental health, but in particular for people with ADHD who can't tune out the things that are happening around them. So my husband has ADHD, he takes medication for it. It's really hard for him to tune out everything. It's like he's getting all this information all at once. For people that are in that environment who have ADHD, this is going to be an impossible environment for them. What can we do to help with that, or to talk to our leadership team at our company to get them to accommodate these individuals who have these conditions, these invisible disabilities, to help them out?
I have a member that's dealing with that very thing because they did an office redesign at ESA as well. They took all the partitions down. They're sit-stand desks. There's a partition at the back. I've had to counsel the member to get medical help, right? We need medical evidence first to help them get through that. They've had to take advantage of the leave provisions that are in the collective agreement and in the health brochure. But it's a slow process that you have to help the person through. If you have an agreeable employer, usually I would say start to get the medical first is what I normally do, and if others have other methodology, I'd be happy to hear them, but get the medical started first. Approach the employer about the hypothetical member with the issue, and start to see if what their willingness is to work with you is what I've been doing, because I've had more than one of these. And then be with the member and also try to control how much they're sharing with you, because sometimes they disclose confidential information that you don't need as an elected representative. But I would start with the trying to support them to get the medical, and use the EAP when it's available as well, because that's a vital thing. If they're having an immediate concern, an immediate reaction to the workplace, it's a problem. So you need to make sure they're safe right away.
Okay, so basically we need to find out who might have ADHD, let them know to get medical prescription, whatever, from their doctor, and then take it up with management in terms of setting up their office environment?
Well, and also I've talked, I've had member meetings where I've talked about the office environment to say, sort of open the discussion about invisible disabilities and the impacts on people, especially with the office redesign. So a general conversation with a large group of people, and invite them to come forward to speak to you about anything that they're experiencing in the workplace, because there are individuals that may not even be aware that they have problems. Like they might just be having an issue at work, and you may have to counsel them and say, well, I'm not sure, that sounds like you're not just having a hard time. It could be something more. Have you considered talking to your doctor?
Okay, yeah, because I know there's a lot of people that have ADHD, so it's a lot more than we think, especially my generation where we weren't diagnosed as younger people. So I just think this is going to be an issue going forward. But thank you so much. We'll keep it in mind.
Yeah, that's what I've been doing. If others are doing something differently, or that sounds like it would help you, I'd come on up. So
I would be saying, request for accommodations. I mean, with the medical support, the employer does have a duty to accommodate. I was just going to mention one site to those of you that weren't at our Empower 2 years ago. There's a website called Ask Jan, which is Job Accommodation Network. It's a fantastic site. It's in the States, and it's based on real accommodations that have been brought forward and helped people with the different disabilities that they have.
Jeff and Rob, thank you very much for that. That was well-researched and factual, legal, all the above. I want to make a comment about what happens in our schools. I think that self-advocacy is extremely important. It starts in the schools, because if a child is struggling and needs an IEP, that needs to be well-defined. We are at the cusp now where young people are more vocal. If that comes through the school system and they're accommodated at university, then that rolls into the workplace. Only in that way we can break stigma. So if we know of students that are struggling, that need help with an IEP, they're to be their own self-advocates. So that was my kind of high-level comment outside of sort of dealing with the workplace issue down the road. But my big concern now is, and this concerns everybody in this room, is the interview process in the respective employers' camp. The interview process has not changed. You sit, you talk. We need to get away from that. It's something that the OPG local has been trying to advocate for a long time. We are saying that, let's take for instance, if somebody's on the spectrum, they have high ability, their brain is just wired differently. Let them demonstrate how they can do the job, rather than to sit and talk, because some people are very anxious. They don't do well in interviews. We have gotten nowhere. This has been brought up on several levels, on the executive level. So I would like us to push as a union to see the interview process change. It should be more competency-based, what I can do rather than what I could say that I could do. So any comments on that?
Well, I think other people today have talked about the flaws in the interview process for all kinds of issues about diversity. I think you're right that invisible disabilities and the impacts of cognitive issues in an interview process, sure, they should be acknowledged as well, but I think the whole interview process has to be looked at, not just in that narrow thing, but us as union leaders, I guess the question we need to ask ourselves is, how do we include that in the collective bargaining process, and how do we get it included in collective
Because I know that, it had to be 8-9 years ago, I saw this on the CBC, that there are progressive companies in the States that would ask you to come in and solve a puzzle to demonstrate you could do the job. So there are ways. So anyway, I'll see you to the next speaker in line. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think it's great, Ralph, and other people have seen the same thing or saying the same thing, is we need to have some change in this area.
I'm Mike Belmore, I'm Society staff. And I kind of want to pick up on something Ralph was talking about breaking stigma. And you both mentioned a number of times throughout the presentation the importance of confidentiality when dealing with accommodations and people's disabilities. And while I think that that is absolutely true, if your role is that of a delegate or a UD or a supervisor or a manager, I think we need to create and focus on creating an environment where people with individual disabilities feel a whole hell of a lot more comfortable talking about them than that 3.2%. And so, you've got to respect everybody's own individual level of comfort. But, I'm somebody with ADHD, anxiety disorders, periodic depression, and a bunch of years ago, I just sort of decided to hell with it. I am beyond stigma. And so I make a point of talking about it. It's not the only thing I talk about. But if the subject comes up, or if somebody else is talking about their experience, or somebody's talking about somebody else's vicarious experience, I jump right in there and say, yeah, no, that's like, I have that issue, right? Or I've had this experience, or those sorts of things. Because, I think that it is hard for people particularly with or invisible disabilities, because a lot of folks will look at it and go, oh, you're just making up an excuse for something in a way that they would never do if you were in a wheelchair or if you had, a cane or something like that. But I think that there's a role for those of us who do have invisible disabilities in our advocacy to kind of personally, as whatever level we're comfortable with, talk about our own situation and make clear to the people around us that there are way more invisible disabilities than that they're aware of, and it's something that they should feel comfortable talking about too.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike.
Interestingly, my question is actually a little bit related. It's about disclosure. So the majority of the time when a disability is disclosed is right when somebody needs the accommodation,
Yeah.
right? Obviously. But we were recently having a discussion or like in a meeting or something where I remember the comment being made, well, it's the first time that management's hearing about this person's disability. And so my question is like, I guess just like when to disclose. Like, should I be disclosed? Like, to me, it seems a little bit intrusive to disclose not at the moment I need the accommodation because I may need an accommodation in the future, or something may change in the workplace, like the hoteling or whatever. There was a different word that people were using. But also that feels incredibly intrusive to be like, oh, I'm just giving you the heads up at this point, that I have this. So I'm just wondering if you can speak to that sort of push and pull on disclosure.
So I'm dealing with this a lot, and one of the things that the employers are totally unresponsive to the situations that, like you're talking about, where it gets to a threshold and then you have to disclose because you can't cope with it anymore. You've already, you've known but when to disclose. And then they reach out to their labor representative and they say, I need help, but I need it now. And then you go to the employer and the employer says, well, you got to go through this hoop and this hoop and this hoop. But in the meantime, we want them to come into the workplace, until they can show us. And it's a really unresponsive system. So I don't have a good answer for that right now. I think that's something that we have to work on as a union to sort of figure out how we can get the employers to be more responsive in a more emergency situation. Like, we do have sick leave programs and things like that, but it seems unnecessary to me that people are using sick leave benefits when really what they need is an accommodation.
And I think the employers need to be educated about the differences in types of disabilities episodic disabilities are around, and they need to recognize that the accommodations might change on a dime. And it's not that the person is abusing it, it's just that's how they're feeling, and that's the circumstances they're in today. So I think a lot of it is educational. People don't realize that there is some episodic to a lot of these things.
Thanks.
Yeah, this presentation is actually part of a longer presentation that Rob put together, and he did a lot of work on it. So, thanks to Rob, but also we're thinking about getting this into the education part of our website so that we can kind of get this going. And I think there's some really good comments here today in terms of where you as representatives need some help, and we do want to help you.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you, Robert. Round of applause.